0223 hours, Al-Asad Air Base, Anbar Province, Iraq. Latitude 33 degrees 47 minutes north. Longitude 42 degrees 26 minutes east. The western desert of Iraq at 2 in the morning is one of the most desolate landscapes on Earth. The Anbar Plateau stretches flat and featureless in every direction. Sand, gravel, and scattered low scrub extending to a horizon that is indistinguishable from the black sky above it. The air temperature has dropped to 14 degrees Celsius, a cold that feels sharper than the number suggests after the 47-degree daytime heat baked the ground, and the buildings and every piece of metal on the flight line all day. The stars are extraordinary. No light pollution within 120 kilometers in any direction. The Milky Way a dense band overhead. The horizon marked only by the dim red obstruction lights on the water towers and the control tower. It is quiet. The flight line is empty. The last sortie of the day recovered at 21:47 hours, and the base has settled into the reduced activity rhythm of the overnight hours. Al-Asad Air Base hosts the 332nd Air Expeditionary Wing, a rotating assignment that currently includes 2 squadrons of F-16C Fighting Falcons from the 77th Fighter Squadron, 20th Fighter Wing, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, deployed on a 180-day Air Expeditionary Force rotation, plus the support and logistics tail that sustains them. KC-135 Tanker Detachment, MQ-9 Reaper Ground Control Stations, Air Operations Center elements, and the full range of maintenance, medical, logistics, and security force personnel that a combat-deployed fighter wing requires. The base is not small. Its perimeter encompasses 19 square kilometers of hardened shelters, fuel storage, ammunition bunkers, maintenance facilities, and the 2 parallel runways that define its operational capability. It sits in the middle of the Anbar Desert with no natural terrain features for 40 kilometers in any direction. A perfect operating environment for aircraft, a perfect radar picture for every sensor system on the base, and, as the IRGC's drone operators in Deir ez-Zor province in eastern Syria have calculated carefully, a large fixed GPS navigable target that sits 620 kilometers from their launch positions. The Shahed-131 is the smaller sibling of the Shahed-136, a delta wing, pusher propeller loitering munition with a 45-kilogram warhead, a range of approximately 900 kilometers, and a unit cost that Iranian defense industry sources have placed at between $20,000 and $35,000 per airframe. Where the Shahed-136 carries a 50-kilogram warhead and the larger Shahed-149 is a full multi-mission UAV platform. The Shahed-131 occupies the light attack niche, smaller, slightly faster, slightly more maneuverable in its terminal approach, and produced in sufficient numbers that the IRGC can contemplate launching 20 of them at a single target as an acceptable expenditure of resources. 20 Shahed-131s, each carrying 45 kilograms of explosive, represents 900 kilograms of total warhead weight. The equivalent of a substantial air-delivered strike package if enough of them reach their aim points. Against aircraft in open parking areas, against fuel storage, against maintenance hangars with thin metal roofing, the cumulative effect of multiple successful impacts could generate operational damage that grounds the F-16 wing for days. The 20 Shahed-131s were launched from 3 concealed positions in Deir ez-Zor province between 2,341 and 2,347 hours. 6 waves of 3 to 4 aircraft each, staggered over 6 minutes to create the loose trail formation that the IRGC's drone employment doctrine specifies for saturation attacks against defended point targets. The launch positions are 47 kilometers inside Syrian territory from the Iraqi border, placing them outside the routine radar coverage of the ground-based air defense systems on the Iraqi side of the frontier. The drones fly at 1,500 feet above the terrain, low enough to use the rolling desert ground as radar clutter, high enough to maintain reliable GPS navigation without terrain masking. At 120 knots cruise speed, the 620-kilometer transit from Deir ez-Zor to Al-Asad takes approximately 3 hours and 12 minutes. At 0223 hours, the lead Shahed-131 is 34 nautical miles northeast of the base perimeter, 17 minutes from its aim point. The detecting asset is not the base's own radar. It is the AN/TPY-2 THAAD radar at the U.S. forward operating location near Erbil in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, 380 kilometers northeast of Al-Assad, whose coverage arc encompasses the Iraqi-Syrian border region, and whose pulse Doppler detection capability against small, slow, low-altitude targets, the exact signature the Shahed-131 presents, has been refined through continuous operational experience since 2021. The AN/TPY-2 at Erbil resolved the first Shahed-131 contacts at 0014 hours when the formation was crossing the Euphrates River Valley 180 kilometers inside Iraq and has been tracking all 20 contacts continuously since that moment. The track data: 20 slow-moving contacts in a loose trail formation on a steady southwest bearing toward Al-Assad at 1,500 feet altitude at 120 knots, was assessed as a Shahed swarm attack at 018 hours, and the alert was transmitted to Al-Assad's Air Defense Control Center, to the Combined Air Operations Center at Al-Udeid, and to the 332nd AEW's command post simultaneously. At Al-Assad, the alert arrived at 019 hours and 3 seconds, 2 hours and 4 minutes before the lead drone would reach the base perimeter. 2 hours and 4 minutes. This is the operational value of the Erbil AN/TPY-2's coverage, not just detection but early detection at a range that provides the defense with preparation time that fundamentally changes the engagement equation. At 019 hours, the base's threat warning was at its lowest overnight setting. By 0025 hours, every defensive system on Al-Assad was at full operational readiness. The C-RAM, counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar system at Al-Assad is built around the M1097 Avenger Air Defense System platform, carrying the M163 Vulcan Air Defense System 20mm rotary cannon adapted for the counter-UAS role, supplemented by 3 AN/TWQ-1 Avenger missile systems carrying AIM-9X Sidewinders, optimized for low, slow, small target engagement. But the primary C-RAM asset at Al-Assad is the AN/TPQ-50 Firefinder radar, SCR, a mobile, rapidly deployable system with a 10-kilometer detection range against small aerial targets, and the Centurion C-RAM system, the land-based variant of the Phalanx close-in weapon system, mounting the M168 20mm Gatling cannon on a wheeled trailer with the same AN/VPS-2 fire control radar that guides the shipboard Phalanx. The Centurion operates in the same autonomous mode as its shipboard counterpart. Once activated in auto-engage mode, it requires no human input to track and engage targets within its engagement envelope. It fires. It tracks. It evaluates. It fires again if necessary. No hesitation, no decision delay, no cognitive load on the crew beyond the initial authorization to engage. Al-Assad has 2 Centurion C-RAM systems positioned at opposite ends of the base's runway complex, sited to provide overlapping coverage of the flight line, the hardened aircraft shelters, the fuel storage area, and the main housing and headquarters complex. Their combined coverage arcs encompass 94% of the base's surface area for incoming threats on any bearing above 10 degrees elevation. The 6% gap, a narrow sector to the northwest where a maintenance hangar's roofline creates a brief coverage shadow, is addressed by the AN/TWQ-1 Avenger systems positioned to fill exactly that gap with AIM-9X missiles, whose engagement envelope covers what the Centurion cannot reach. At 0031 hours, the 2 F-16C alert aircraft, always kept at 15-minute alert during overnight hours on a rotating crew basis, are scrambled to 5-minute alert. Crews in cockpits, engines on external power, all systems running. At 0114 hours, as the Shahed formation is assessed crossing the Iraqi-Syrian border trace and confirmed inbound, the alert is upgraded to immediate launch. Both F-16Cs are airborne from Al-Assad's runway 28 at 0117 hours and 44 seconds, 2 hours and 7 minutes, before the lead Shahed-131 will reach the perimeter. The F-16C Fighting Falcon in the counter. UAS role carries a specific ordnance configuration that has been developed through operational experience in Iraq and Syria. 2 AIM-9X Block 2 Sidewinders for short-range infrared engagements against heat-emitting targets, 2 AIM-120D AMRAAMs for beyond visual range engagements, where the drone's radar cross-section is sufficient for active seeker acquisition, and the AN/ASQ-213 harm targeting system pod on the centerline station. Not for anti-radiation missions tonight, but for its electronic support measures capability that allows the F-16C crew to detect and classify the Shahed-131's navigation system emissions. The F-16C's AN/APG-68V9 radar, in its ground mapping and air-to-ground modes, can resolve the Shahed-131 small radar cross-section, approximately 0.01 square meters, at ranges under 8 nautical miles in favorable geometry. In the counter-UAS role, the F-16C typically closes to visual range using FLIR navigation pod cues before employing weapons, because the drone's thermal signature from its 2-stroke pusher engine is more reliable for targeting than the small radar return in cluttered low-altitude airspace. The AN/TPY-2 at Erbil provides continuous Shahed track data to the F-16C mission computers through the data link throughout the engagement. The F-16Cs do not need to search for the targets. They have 20 GPS-located contacts, their tracks updated every 6 seconds, their formation geometry displayed on the pilot's moving map. The intercept is not a search problem. It is a geometry problem. 20 contacts spread over a 40 nautical mile trail formation, flying at 1,500 feet and 120 knots, converging on Al-Assad from the northeast. The F-16C section leader plans the engagement pass from the northwest, approaching the Shahed formation from ahead and to one side, using the drone's own forward motion to drive the closure rate and allow the F-16C to step through the formation from front to rear in a single high-speed engagement pass. At 01:58 hours and 22 seconds, the lead F-16C pilot acquires the first Shahed-131 visually at 4,200 feet altitude on his AN/AAQ-28 Lightning targeting pod display. The pusher propeller aircraft's small thermal signature is clear on the flyer in the cold desert air, a distinctive delta wing shape moving steadily southwest at 120 knots. He selects AIM-9X, acquires the infrared seeker tone, and fires at 01:58 hours and 31 seconds from a range of 1.4 nautical miles. The AIM-9X Block 2's seeker acquisition on a pusher propeller engine thermal signature is reliable in these atmospheric conditions. Contact 1. Rendered inoperable at 01:58 hours and 38 seconds. 7 seconds from launch to intercept at this range. The F-16C section works through the Shahed formation in a coordinated 2-ship sweep, lead aircraft engaging the front of the formation, wingmen engaging the rear, both aircraft expending their AIM-9X inventory of 2 missiles each before transitioning to gun employment for closer range engagements. The M61A1 Vulcan 20mm cannon in the F-16C's fuselage carries 511 rounds, enough for approximately 5 seconds of fire at the weapon's 6,000 round per minute rate, which is more than sufficient for multiple engagements against a 45-kilogram delta wing airframe that disintegrates under a 3-round burst. Between 01:58 and 02:14 hours, the 2 F-16Cs account for 13 Shahed-131 contacts rendered inoperable across multiple firing passes, working through the trail formation from northeast to southwest as the surviving drones close toward Al-Assad. 7 contacts remain as the F-16Cs complete their last firing pass at 02:14 hours and expend their gun ammunition. Both aircraft break off to the south to remain clear of the Centurion C-RAM engagement zones that are now active as the surviving drones enter the 10-kilometer perimeter of Al-Assad's defensive envelope. The handoff from airborne intercept to ground-based C-RAM is clean. The AN/TPY-2 track data continues feeding the Centurion system's fire control computers in real time. and the F-16C's departure from the engagement zone is coordinated through the Al-Asad Air Defense Control Center to ensure no fratricide geometry develops between the departing fighters and the incoming C-RAM fire. The Northern Centurion C-RAM system acquires its first contact at 02:14 hours and 47 seconds. A Shahed-131 at 7.8 kilometers range, bearing 022 degrees, altitude 1,400 feet, closing at 120 knots. The AN/VPS-2 fire control radar tracks the contact through its approach. The Centurion's engagement algorithm computes the intercept solution in 0.3 seconds and begins firing at 02:15 hours and 02 seconds. The 20mm stream, 75 rounds per second in the Centurion's sustained fire mode, creates a dense pattern of projectiles in the drone's approach corridor. The Shahed-131 at 1,500 feet altitude and 120 knots airspeed is in straight and level flight with no evasive capability. Contact 14, rendered inoperable at 02:15 hours and 06 seconds at 7.2 kilometers range. The debris impacts the desert floor 4.1 kilometers northeast of the base perimeter. The Centurion's fire control radar reacquires the next contact at 02:15 hours and 11 seconds as the first engagement completes. Contact 15, rendered inoperable at 02:15 hours and 19 seconds. The system's autonomous engagement cycle, acquire, compute, fire, assess, reacquire, runs faster than any human controller could manage the same sequence. The Centurion does not tire. It does not hesitate. It processes each contact with identical mechanical precision regardless of whether it is the first engagement of the night or the seventh. The Southern Centurion is engaging the three contacts that approach on a bearing that puts them in the Southern System's primary coverage arc. Contact 16, rendered inoperable at 02:15 hours and 28 seconds. Contact 17, rendered inoperable at 02:15 hours and 41 seconds. The AN/TWQ-1 Avenger system on the base's northwestern perimeter launches an AIM-9X against Contact 18, a Shahed-131 whose approach bearing passes through the coverage gap between the two Centurions. Contact 18, rendered inoperable at 02:16 hours and 03 seconds at 5.8 kilometers range. Two contacts remain. Contact 19 is at 4.2 kilometers range, bearing 347 degrees, altitude 1,200 feet. It has descended from its 1,500-foot cruise altitude in what appears to be a programmed terminal dive toward the flight line. The descent changes the engagement geometry for the Northern Centurion, whose fire control radar must track a descending target rather than a level flying one. The algorithm adjusts. The fire solution updates. The Centurion fires. Contact 19, rendered inoperable at 02:16 hours and 31 seconds at 3.1 kilometers range. The debris impacts in the desert 2.3 kilometers north of the runway threshold. The closest any Shahed-131 will come to the base. Contact 20, the final Shahed-131, is tracked by both Centurion systems simultaneously as it approaches at 1,500 feet on a bearing that places it near the boundary of both coverage arcs. The Northern Centurion claims the engagement. Contact 20, rendered inoperable at 02:17 hours and 04 seconds at 4.8 kilometers range. All 20 Shahed-131 contacts rendered inoperable. 13 by F-16C airborne intercept between 01:58 and 02:14 hours. 7 by ground-based C-RAM and AIM-9X in the 02:14 to 02:17 hours terminal engagement window. 0 impacts on Al-Asad Air Base infrastructure. 0 casualties among base personnel. The closest debris impact to any base structure was 2.3 kilometers from the runway threshold, a field of sand and gravel that will be swept by an EOD team at first light and found to contain fragments of Shahed-131 airframe consistent with the Centurion engagement. The two F-16Cs recover at Al-Asad at 02:41 hours, their crews debriefing in the 332nd AEW's intelligence spaces for 90 minutes. The gun camera footage and lightning pod recordings from both aircraft are downloaded and will be processed for distribution to the counter-UAS intelligence community. The specific thermal signatures, the formation geometry, the engagement timing data, and the performance parameters of the Shahed-131 in its operational employment configuration are all captured in higher fidelity than any previous collection event. The IRGC has provided the United States Air Force's counter-UAS development community with the most detailed operational performance characterization of the Shahed-131 ever recorded. At 0400 hours, the Base Security Operations Center stands down from its elevated threat posture. The flight line is swept visually by security forces patrols confirming no debris reached the aircraft parking areas. The first F-16C of the morning's planned sortie schedule launches at 0612 hours, on the published schedule, unaffected by the night's events. The 332nd AEW's operations officer notes in the daily summary that the base experienced a 20-drone attack and suffered 0 damage. The summary is 3 sentences. The event that the IRGC spent months preparing and 20 airframes executing generates 3 sentences in the base's daily operational record. The IRGC's planning assumption was that 20 Shahed-131s approaching at low altitude through radar clutter would overwhelm the base's point defense systems through saturation, that the combined weight of 900 kilograms of warhead against a large fixed target would achieve at minimum a significant probability of 1 or more impacts against high-value infrastructure. The assumption was invalidated by the 124-minute warning that the AN/TPY-2 at Erbil provided, which allowed the F-16C intercept to remove 13 contacts before they reached C-RAM range and reduce the terminal engagement from a 20-drone saturation to a 7-drone sequence that the Centurion systems processed in 2 minutes and 17 seconds. The saturation that was supposed to overwhelm the defense never materialized as a saturation, because the early warning architecture converted it from a simultaneous arrival of 20 contacts into a sequential engagement of individual contacts across a 19-minute window. This is the operational lesson the IRGC's drone warfare planners must incorporate. The Shahed-131's 3-hour transit from Deir ez-Zor to Al-Asad at 1,500 feet altitude over the flat Anbar Plateau is a 3-hour window of detection opportunity for any sensor system with coverage of the Iraqi airspace. The AN/TPY-2 at Erbil has that coverage. The 2-hour warning it provided was not a lucky outcome of this specific engagement. It is the repeatable consequence of using a system with a 3-hour transit time against a base within the Erbil sensor's detection range. The drone is slow. The radar sees it the entire way. The time that slowness provides to the defense is the same every time. Al-Assad's flight operations resume on schedule. The F-16Cs are flying missions over western Iraq by mid-morning. The Centurion systems are reloaded and back in auto-engage mode by 0630 hours. The AN/TPY-2 at Erbil continues its surveillance of the Iraqi-Syrian border region without interruption. And the IRGC launch positions in Deir ez-Zor, whose coordinates were refined by the RC-135W's collection throughout the engagement, are in the CAOC's targeting database with a time-over-target solution valid for the next 72 hours. 20 drones, 3 hours of flying, 0 impacts. The base opened on schedule. Bye for now.